Welcome to Preventing Harassment and Bullying in the Workplace. This is Session A.
Session B is for managers and supervisors, and that will follow.
This class is part of your organization's mandatory harassment prevention training class. Thank you for your participation. Plan on spending the next hour watching this video and taking the test. I'm Marcia.
And I'm Philip.
And we're ready to get started with the training. This training is brought to you by Prevent Harassment LLC, dedicated to a professional and respectful workplace.
There are 5 objectives to this course. The first, build skills to resolve employee issues.
Employees invariably have issues that come up, and we want to make sure that you know about your resources and tools available to you.
Objective number 2, increase employee morale and productivity.
Employee morale affects everything that we do, not just productivity, but also commitment, quality, customer service. Those are all very important aspects of your employment at this organization. We want to make sure that your workplace is inclusive and respectful.
Objective number 3, learn about your policies.
We want you to know about our policies and ensure that we are consistent in the application of those policies, because the minute we're inconsistent, someone could say that we are unlawful or discriminatory, and we certainly don't want that to occur. Having a policy manual ensures that we are consistent across the board.
Objective number 4, increase professionalism as an organization.
If we're professional and respectful, we shouldn't have any issues. So that will be our goal.
Objective number 5, comply with the law.
There are many laws you should know about, both on the federal level and the state level, that give you rights and responsibilities, and we'll go into that in great detail. While this mandatory training is required by law, there's certainly a lot of other good reasons to make sure everyone is on the same page.
With those 5 objectives, the end result will be to help create a healthy and respectful workplace. The process for this course includes a video and a certification test. For the video, we'll watch this video and take notes.
At 2 separate times, we'll provide you with codes, and those codes will be evidence that you've actually watched the whole video. And then we'll go to the certification test. You need to return to the website, take the test, which will include multiple choice questions, and pass the test at an 80% rate. Also, we'll provide you with ongoing support, so you can always access us through the website. Managers, supervisors, and team leaders will follow the same process for Session B. You watch another video and take a separate certification test. At any time, please email us with any questions that you might have. As we know, there's a heightened awareness of discrimination, harassment, and fair treatment in society, with movements like Black Lives Matter, Time's Up, and Me Too, and recent U.S. Supreme Court decisions protecting the rights of Americans based on sexual orientation and gender expression. Employers must take serious their programs regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Harassment is not new to employees. On day 1, employees receive information regarding harassment in their orientation packet. We also have posters that are hanging in the workplace. One is called EEO is the Law, which details the rights and responsibilities that are afforded to employees regarding discrimination and harassment. We also have a policy manual, and we've done trainings in the past, but by following our policies, we demonstrate that we take this issue seriously. This training is broken up into 3 different segments. The first segment is going to be legal issues, which will talk about the rights and responsibilities that you have. Secondly, we'll talk about behavioral issues, how you should communicate and interact with your coworkers, vendors, suppliers, and your managers. And thirdly, we'll talk about some practical issues, what you should say or do if you've observed or have been victimized by harassment in the workplace. Our goal with this training is to educate you about the rights and responsibilities you have in the workplace, but also to give you some ground rules for a professional and respectful interactions at all times, and certainly to give you some resources in case there's an issue that comes up. Thank you for listening and taking this topic seriously. Now let's get into the first section, which is legal issues. In this section, we'll talk about legal issues and the many laws that provide you with rights and responsibilities. We'll discuss the legal issues having to do with discrimination, harassment, retaliation, and abusive conduct, or otherwise known as bullying in the workplace.
There are both federal and state laws. Federal, there are U.S. Supreme Court cases and U.S. EEOC Guidance.
On the state level, there are several states that have mandatory training requirements, such as California, New York, and Illinois. Other states have requirements for public sector employees only, and then other states encourage the training. But we suggest that all employees receive training on this very important topic, regardless of whether it is mandated by law. Let's talk about the recommendations from the U.S. Supreme Court and the EEOC to do this training.
In 1998, the U.S. Supreme Court had two landmark decisions that strongly encouraged employers to conduct harassment prevention training.
Those cases were Burlington Industries versus Ellerth and Farragher versus the City of Boca Raton. And in both of those cases, the employer was able to demonstrate what's called the affirmative defense because they took reasonable care to prevent and respond to the harassment that occurred. In both of those cases, the employees unreasonably failed to take advantage of any preventive or corrective opportunities available to them. Those cases demonstrate that employers should take proactive steps to avoid liability. In 1998, the EEOC provided a three-pronged approach as guidance for employers for preventing harassment. First, employers should adopt specific policies about sexual harassment, including a definition of harassment with real-life examples, language about non-retaliation for those who come forward with complaints, and also a statement that sexual harassment will lead to disciplinary action up to and including termination.
For complaint handling, complaints of sexual harassment must be promptly, vigorously, and honestly investigated, and valid complaints must be remedied. Employees must be offered multiple avenues of complaint.
And number three, the EEOC suggests that employers should consider training all employees, from the CEO to frontline employees, to ensure that they are sensitive to the issues of sexual harassment. Here's a list of the federal protections that are afforded to employees. So basically, you cannot be discriminated against or harassed on the basis of race, sex, color, religion, national origin, ethnicity, or ancestry. Also included is sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Additional laws provide additional protections, such as age 40 and above, pregnancy and related medical conditions, military status, disability, immigration status, and genetic information. We'll go through each of these laws in successive slides. The major federal law dealing with discrimination and harassment is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination and harassment based on race, sex, color, religion, national origin, ethnicity, and ancestry. Title VII prohibits discrimination in hiring and promotional opportunities within the organization. It also proactively requires religious accommodation, which might mean days off or time off to pray, those sorts of things. The accommodation must be reasonable. Also, it should be noted that if you have locations outside of the United States, Title VII also applies. And in June 2020, the United States Supreme Court affirmed that Title VII does protect employees from discrimination and harassment based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Another law pertaining to discrimination and harassment is the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. It protects employees over the age of 40. It was the ages 40 to 70, but then the upper limit was removed. So like Title VII, it applies in hiring and promotional opportunities within the organization. So in terms of hiring, no questions can be asked about high school graduation dates or age, but it's okay to ask about college graduation dates. But also like Title VII, it applies to harassment as well. So no jokes or comments or teasing about age. Another law is the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which protects people who are pregnant or have related medical conditions, such as miscarriages, infertility, or an inability to become pregnant. The only exception to that would be whether the qualification was a bona fide occupational qualification, which is a very limited exception. Under the Uniform Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, an employer cannot discriminate based on military status. Employers must hold the job open while the employee is out on active duty and reinstate them to the same or a similar position upon their return from leave. Another law which protects Americans is the Americans with Disabilities Act. Employees that are covered have a physical or mental impairment that affects a major life function, such as seeing, walking, hearing, breathing. Employers are required to provide reasonable accommodation, but this accommodation can only be determined through an interactive process, which is handled by an individual such as HR or in your benefits department. This law also restricts medical inquiries to designated personnel, so make sure if you have access to any information that you keep it confidential and be respectful of employees' rights to confidentiality regarding their medical condition. And the Immigration Reform and Control Act has an anti-discrimination provision. It's not an EEO law per se, but it does have a provision which prohibits discrimination based on citizenship status. So yes, we need to verify an employee's eligibility and authorization to work with an I-9 form upon hire, but while they're an employee, we cannot treat them differently because of their citizenship status. And in 2008, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act was passed, making it unlawful to discriminate against an employee on the basis of genetic information. Let's the information in this first section. Recognize that there are many laws, both federal and state, that provide you with rights in the workplace, but you also have responsibilities. Your responsibilities are obviously to do your job, but also to behave in a way that is conducive to the standards of conduct that are listed in your employee handbook or personnel policy manual. So be sure that you're not infringing on the rights of others in the workplace. Now, as we mentioned in the beginning, you'll need a code for the middle of the session, and that code is CUSXV. You'll need to write that code down and provide it as evidence that you're watching the entire video when you do the certification test. Okay, let's move on to the next section, which is behavioral issues.
Section 2, Behavioral Issues. Follow the standards of conduct and be respectful and professional.
From a behavioral standpoint, there's several issues that can get employees into trouble. This usually happens between interactions and communications with your coworkers. The first issue is profanity. Obviously, profanity entails anger and emotion, and there's no place for it in the workplace. Also, jokes. Jokes are fun. However, sometimes people are the butt of jokes, or jokes are made at people's expense, and so those are jokes that are going to cause you issues. Yelling or raising your voice indicates a lack of control over your emotions. So when there's the intensity and frequency of raising your voice, that could be problematic. Also, name calling. You should not engage in names that are going to be offensive to other people, and this would include calling people names like honey, dear, sweetie, babe, those sorts of things. Be careful about your electronic communications via email, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, social media, and even online games. Recognize that behavior that may be socially acceptable, such as flirting and joking, is probably not appropriate in a professional setting. So be aware of your behavior and act accordingly. Sometimes some of our communications and behavior has a bit of bias in it. There's prejudice or preconceptions or assumptions that we make about people. And there's also the element of unconscious bias, microaggressions that are comments that are made that don't intend to offend or humiliate or embarrass people, but that's the end result. So we need to be cautious of those sorts of comments and behaviors.
So let's start with the impact of harassment, and first with the impact on individuals. Physical and emotional stress and health issues are one element of harassment. Second, impact to self-confidence and pride in work. And a third, but not final, is the job career reputation. Another impact is on the team. There's poor team cohesion, lower productivity, loss of morale, stress, and interpersonal conflict. The third is impact on the organization. Cost of investigations and settlements, liability, high turnover and loss of valuable employees, negative publicity, and loss of contracts, grants, public trust, and confidence.
For all those reasons, we want to ensure that people's behavior is appropriate, respectful, and professional. We're now going to talk specifically about sexual harassment, but first, just a couple of general comments. Remember that harassment can be based on other elements, not just sex. It could be based on race, color, religion, or any of the other protected categories that we talked about. It is subject to interpretation because we are different people with different backgrounds, different genders, different ages. We all have different senses of humor and different tolerance levels. So what offends or humiliates one person might not offend another person. However, it is subject to the standard of the reasonable person. Would a reasonable person be offended given the circumstances? And certainly if anyone tells you that they're offended, you need to stop that behavior at once. There are 4 types of sexual harassment. The first is sexual favors, or quid pro quo. That would be a manager or supervisor abusing their power by saying something like, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Or if you don't do this for me, I won't do this for you. The other forms are physical, verbal, and visual. Here are some scenarios that are commonplace examples of harassment in the workplace.
So scenario number 1, joking at work. 2 employees are observed talking in the break room. Both are laughing and are engaged in the conversation.
This is probably fine as long as the employees are not joking about another person or making comments or jokes at the person's expense that demean or embarrass or offend another employee.
Scenario number 2, complaints. An employee has complained about unfair treatment, so the supervisor is unsure how to treat them and ends up avoiding the employee.
An employee has the right to complain and shouldn't be treated any differently as a result of that complaint. So if an employee makes a complaint and they're being ignored or avoided or ostracized, that's changing the terms or conditions of their employment, and that could be considered as retaliatory.
Scenario number 3, electronic communications. You're friends on Facebook with several other employees and you notice inappropriate postings about a coworker.
Your communications on Facebook and related social media sites could be subject to your employer's electronic communications policy. In most cases, disclosing confidential information or communications that are disparaging or disloyal to the employer are restricted. Yes, there is the element of free speech. However, in many cases, employees' behavior online has been subjected to disciplinary action or termination.
Scenario number 4, hugging. An employee just got back from a long vacation and is happy to see his or her coworkers.
Your policy outlines behavior that could be physical harassment, and usually that is pinching, patting, kissing, hugging, or putting your arm around someone. With regard to hugging, it can create a hostile workplace when it is unwelcome and pervasive. The rule of thumb is that you can probably hug your close friends, but not all the time, and you can probably hug someone if you ask and they say it's okay. But you shouldn't hug someone who you supervise, and you shouldn't hug a coworker with whom you're romantically involved.
Scenario number 5, body language. An employer stares, gives mean looks, or wags fingers and becomes visually angry with coworkers.
Here's an example of visual harassment. Could be gestures, facial expressions, pointing your finger, and those types of displays, which are aggressive, and they could create a hostile work environment. Even if nothing was stated, the type of behavior that we see in these photos could be problematic.
Scenario number 6, friendships. Your coworkers are friends and ends up spending weekends and evenings socializing. Several romantic relationships have resulted on the team.
The answer is that although we cannot control your off-duty conduct, employees should refrain from public displays of affection and realize that their conduct could be questioned should the behavior come into the workplace.
Scenario number 7, dating. An employee asked another employee out and she said no. He repeatedly asked her out for a date.
The answer is it makes sense that you may want to date someone that you meet on the job. However, if you ask an employee out for a date and they say no, do not repeatedly ask them out. That could be an example of harassment. Also, employees that do not report to each other can date, but not if there's a reporting relationship. That could cause issues with conflict and preferential treatment in the workplace. Also, employees in relationships should in general be cautious because the romance might end, and what will result is conflict and bad feelings.
Scenario number 8, compliments. A coworker tends to give you compliments on a regular basis, saying things like, "Hey, you look great," or "Have you been working out?"
The answer is it's often not what you say, but how you say it. And compliments may be misinterpreted due to the tone, content, frequency, or intensity of the attention, among other factors. If the person has said they're uncomfortable being complimented, certainly do not continue this sort of attention. And remember that all workplace communications should be professional and respectful at all times. Most of those examples were commonplace. We just wanted to give you a sense of the ground rules for engaging in communications and other interactions with your coworkers. The key is to ensure that we're always being respectful and professional. Remember, it isn't necessary that inappropriate comments be directed at an individual for them to make a viable complaint. If someone witnesses or otherwise becomes aware of an incident of inappropriate behavior, they can raise concerns. Everyone should be on their best behavior at work. This includes vendors, suppliers, customers, and certainly employees themselves. Now let's move on to Section 3, the practical issue.
Section 3, practical issues, resources, and next steps. So the employee responsibilities are read the policy, review posters, uphold standards, and remind others about the policy or refer to appropriate persons.
We've talked about a lot of the rights that you have in the workplace, but you certainly do have responsibilities as well. Your employee handbook is a great place to look in case you have any questions about the behavioral standards. Also, the set of employment posters that are hanging in a common space are a very good resource for you as well. They include information of the agency that's responsible for that law, as well as contact information. Your organization has a lot of policies that are important in your employment. There's an EEO policy and a policy regarding harassment and bullying in the workplace. There's also a complaint handling procedure, and of course other policies such as standards of conduct, dress code, confidentiality, and your social media or electronic communications policy. So read the policy manual and understand what's required of you.
When it comes to reporting harassment, speak up if you know or suspect a situation. Second, multiple avenues of complaint exist through human resources, your manager, supervisor, manager, or executive, or anyone really in a management position.
Remember, it's the employer's responsibility to investigate any claim of harassment promptly, vigorously, and honestly, but we need to know about it. So it's your responsibility to speak up if you know or suspect a situation that's going on. It's your choice who you want to go to with any complaint, concern, or question. You could even submit the complaint anonymously. However, it's very difficult to investigate a claim if we don't know specifics. Oftentimes, employees are hesitant to come forward with information regarding a complaint or situation, but you should know that your organization's policy includes a non-retaliation provision, meaning you can't be retaliated against for coming forward with that information. Employees do have the right to complain, and we want to be respectful of that, but certainly you should not fear retaliation for complaining or even being involved as a witness in an investigation. Your organization has an investigation process in place which requires employees to come forward as soon as possible with any question, concern, or problem. One thing to mention is that we cannot ensure 100% confidentiality. However, we will only share information with people who have a demonstrated need to know, and employees should try to maintain the confidentiality of their information as well. If you ever had any questions or concerns, you could go to your internal resources such as HR or your manager, or you could gather information from the EEOC website, which is www.eeoc.gov, and there's also contact information on your employment posters. You could go to the U.S. Prevent Harassment website, and you can certainly submit questions to us, and we will answer those within 2 business days. And that website is uspreventharassment.com. So in summary, we want to make sure that you're aware of your conduct and how it impacts other people.
Understand the legal issues, rights, and responsibilities.
Make sure that you separate your professional behavior from your social behavior.
And last but not least, seek advice from HR or your manager if you have a question, comment, or concern.
That concludes the video component of this 1-hour training class. The rest of the time will be composed of a final activity as well as the certification test, and that should take you to the full hour. The final activity is to review the employment posters pertaining to discrimination and harassment. The federal poster is called EEO's the Law, and a link can be found on the uspreventharassment.com website. Most states also have a state-specific poster, which is your Human Rights or Fair Employment Practices poster, so track that down and take a look at the rights that are afforded to you by your state. Now you're ready for the certification test. The certification test consists of 10 multiple-choice questions that are not very hard, but are meant to ensure that you listen to the entire video. You'll also be asked to attest to the fact that you watched the entire video and have done the activity. The code for the end of the session is CGUSX, and you'll also need the code for the middle of the session. So go to uspreventharassment.com, click on the Session A button, and you'll go to the quiz. Enter your name as you want it to appear on the certificate, your company name, as well as your company email. A certificate will be generated for you, and records will be maintained for your employer. Thank you for participating, and thank you for taking this topic seriously. Managers, supervisors, and team leaders should also take Session B. If you have any questions about the content, you can submit those questions at the website, uspreventharassment.com. Thank you again.